Hello and welcome to Georgia Bulldogs Live here on the Georgia Voice of College Football. I am your host, Matt Green. I appreciate you tuning in and everyone who's tuning in live this week. Please like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff. If you got something to say, write it in the comments. I may talk about it on the show. We love to stay engaged with the audience. And you can follow me on Twitter at Matt_W_Green. Let's get started. We got Jackson Johnson chiming in here. I appreciate you tuning in as always, Jackson. What's up, Bulldog Nation? What's up, Jackson? Let's get started. So to start the show tonight, I know this is what we want to do as Georgia fans. Mike D jumping in here. Go Dogs. I appreciate you tuning in live, Mike. But let's where I want to start the show, and I know this is the last thing that Georgia fans want to talk about right now. But let's talk about this Sugar Bowl again. I came to you with the instant reaction, the post game. We don't need to rehash everything. But I've had some time to decompress since then. A little further a little further introspective. I don't know. Words are hard. But you know what I'm trying to say. A little bit further analysis of this game upon further review of the Sugar Bowl. And I want to start with Kirby Smart because I think I came to you, it may have been a little hot takey to some, where I really kind of blamed this loss on Kirby Smart. And, that may have sounded harsh to some, but it's like when you're talking about your children, it's just, I expect more, so it comes from a place of love. So it may have been harsh, but it's honestly the first time that I can remember a game, like I said, on the instant reaction, first time I can remember a game coming away thinking Kirby Smart is the reason that Georgia lost that game. It was the first time I can ever remember that. I felt like Gunnar Stockton, didn't play great, played well enough to win. The defense didn't play great, played well enough to win. And that's not to say Kirby should be fired or is on the hot seat or any sort of nonsense like that, or he should be under a bunch of pressure coming in the next year. It was just a bad decision I think he made to be aggressive before the half and, under the current situation. And you could tell, I think he regretted it by halftime. He said so in his halftime interview. So, but I mean, with everything going on in this man's personal life, his dad having the issues with the surgery that he had in New Orleans has since passed away. I mean, I think it's pretty understandable if there's going to be a time for this guy to maybe not be as sharp as he could have been on the sideline. So rest in peace, Sonny Smart, Kirby Smart's dad. Just a tragic situation as far as all that goes. Kirby Smart is still the best coach in college football. I wouldn't trade Kirby for anyone out there. And honestly, that's like the national titles haven't even changed my mind. Like it was definitely a hotter take back in 2020 or before the 2021 title game to think like I wouldn't trade Kirby Smart for anybody. But that's how I felt, exactly this day, January 1st, January 1st. It's January 7th right now. January 7th, 2021, prior to Georgia winning the national championship. Like 4 years ago, I would have told you the same thing. I'm not trading Kirby Smart for anyone. It's clear, anyone who pays attention, like how much this guy has elevated the program since being hired. And like, I mean, not to mention he's a UGA alum and just loves Athens, loves the University of Georgia more than just about anybody. But like I said, Gunnar played as well as you can expect QB2 to play. The defense, I was looking at the drive. The drives really just made it that much more frustrating because this Georgia defense came to play in the Sugar Bowl. 9 offensive drives Notre Dame had in that game. Oh, outside of the one play 12-yard drive. So there's scoring drives in that game. 49 yards and a field goal, 32 yards and a field goal, 13 yards and a touchdown, 29 yards and a field goal. Notre Dame dominated the field position game in this game. And, you got to think, Brett Thorson being out, the, All-American punter. I don't know if he was officially an All-American, but he's one of the best punters I've seen play at Georgia. You had a stud in the punting game, and Georgia did tend to dominate field position in a lot of their games, especially a lot of their big wins on the season. But outside of that, one play 12-yard or one play 13 yards, the touchdown they just kind of stole right before the half. Notre Dame's offense had 9 offensive drives, 3 field goals, 5 punts, and a turnover on downs, averaged 3.4 yards for play. So it's frustrating because I think one of my first takes on the show, I might not even still it was still everything was fresh, but I don't know if I voiced this exactly how I meant to say it, but what I meant to say on the first show was that two things could be true. Gunnar Stockton could play as well as you could expect him to play. Carson Beck, playing in that game changes the outcome of that game. I don't think it's a hot take to say. Like, Georgia had so many games, 8 of the 10 games that Georgia had against Power 4 competition this year, they scored less than or 7 points or less in regulation. So it was frustrating, but with Carson Beck at quarterback, it's like that was business as usual. That team, they also averaged about 20 points a game in the second half of the back. They were not able to get it done in the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame. So that's all we need to say as far as the 2020 as far as the Sugar Bowl game goes and the college football playoff. It was frustrating. Georgia did not get it done against Notre Dame, and you got to think a big part of that is the quarterback situation. Oh man, I'm sorry about that. I appreciate everyone who stuck with me there, having some technical difficulties there. But yeah, that's really all I had to say about the Sugar Bowl. It was a little frustrating, but um, I did have this one thought because I a couple years ago after Georgia beat Alabama in the national championship, I had this buddy of mine who was just like, "Oh yeah, I was just heartbroken over that national championship game," and I was like, "Buddy, you don't know what heartbreak is. Like, you're an Alabama fan. Like, I don't even want to hear what sort of heartbreak you think you've experienced. Like, all the national titles, it can't compare." And now that Georgia's experienced their 2 national titles, I can say without a shadow of the doubt that Bama fans don't know what heartbreak is anymore, because these losses, maybe it's just me, these losses don't sting the same as they once did. Like, I think it's like you go ask a Chicago Cubs fan in 2016. Like, they won the World Series in 2016, lost in the NLCS the next year. Like, do you really think Cubs fans were heartbroken after losing in the NLCS the following year? Like, it'd been 108 years since they won a World Series. Like, I think I don't know how many years that buys you, but 108, like, how many generations is that of Cubs fans that just did not, ever see their team win a championship? Like, so I think, especially winning back to back, like, don't get me wrong, I'm a diehard through and through. Like, I remember, 2002 Florida, like the DJ Shockley throwing the interception, Terrence Edwards with the big drop late. Like, I remember, the 2004 Auburn game, 2005 Auburn for that matter. Some of these games that ended Georgia's season, a second loss, all of the Alabama games, 2012, the 2017 national title game, the 2018 SEC championship, like, all of those games were so heartbreaking. 2020 Florida, even. Every time one of those games happened and Georgia's season is officially over, it just added to that drought. Now it's 25 years since 1980. Now it's 30 years. Now it's 35. We got to 40. And kudos to Georgia rocking the 1980 throwbacks in 2020. Like, just literally celebrating that had been 40 years since we won a national title. I feel like it was a way to, I don't know, to embrace the trolling, kind of like the Yankee Doodle thing with the Revolutionary War. You're like, no, we're just gonna own it. You think you're making fun of us? We're just gonna own it. And those throwbacks were also great uniforms. So can't say enough about that. But yeah, it's after these two national titles, 2023 was disappointing. The one time you lose knocks you out of the 14 playoff. That probably doesn't happen most years. A one-loss team, team that started 12-0, lose the SEC championship is probably in most years. And then this year had the toughest schedule in college football, and didn't found a way to couldn't get it done at the end of the season. So I think one thing that makes it a little easier, I think, is the backup quarterback thing. Like you're playing shorthanded is just like a little more understandable. And I think ultimately, like, it's gonna sound homerish to say, but I mean, they're the preseason number one team in the country, so they don't win the championship. It's a disappointment, right? But I honestly do feel like this team overachieved. Like, I mean, you just look at it, like, they didn't run the ball well, they didn't catch the ball well, and the offensive line wasn't good. You played the toughest schedule in all of college football. It wasn't even a year where you had an elite defense. You had a very good defense, but not the elite of elite Georgia defense. And that team won the SEC. Like, that doesn't sound like a team that wins the SEC. And they got it done. So they did win the SEC championship, but ultimately without Carson Beck, they fall short to Notre Dame. So it's definitely disappointing, but is what it is. We'll see what kind of changes Georgia makes this offseason, if any, really. I don't think any sort of hot takes, any sort of radical change needs to be made, other than maybe just enhancing this roster a little bit. So that brings us to our next segment here. Georgia transfer portal update. So let's get into the transfer portal. That's what everyone wants to talk about. As soon as their team's out, like, that's the number one topic for every team, really. And Georgia has been as hot as anybody on the transfer portal. Georgia fans were worried about a week ago, like, all these teams getting commits in the portal. Georgia still didn't have any. And now you're seeing the last couple days, Georgia just one guy after another. So it started with the Branch brothers from USC, Zachariah Branch, the former 5-star receiver, and Zion Branch, his brother, the 4-star safety from USC. These guys come in and fill two positions of need. For one, Anthony Evans transferred, Georgia's punt returner, and we'll obviously get to the guys that are leaving via the portal. But Zachariah Branch filling a role as a return man, and then just maybe that guy in the slot, just the big play, big yards after catch kind of guy. Like, he didn't have a great year at USC after a really promising freshman year, but I think the talent is still there. Like, he kind of reminds me of a Kadarius Toney type from Florida. Like, just that quick twitch. Like, some of those guys are just different. The way they move, the way they make people miss. I could see a little bit of that. And so hopefully, he has a bounce back year as a junior at Georgia. And then Zion Branch, obviously, with Malachi Starks going pro, as well as Dan Jackson graduating. Safety was going to be a position of need. And you don't only add Zion Branch from USC, you also add Jaden Harris, the safety out of Miami, as well as Adrian Maddox, the safety from UAB. And Maddox was committed to Florida as of a couple of days ago, never actually signed with them out of the portal. This guy's just kind of gradually worked his way up in the college football world. And I wonder how many more guys we'll see like this in the future. Starts his career at Alabama State, has a good couple years, transfers to UAB, just works his way up. And now this guy's going to be playing at the University of Georgia. So, this is one of the, I think, the things people like about the portal. I guess it depends on who you are, because you're at the G5 level and you get a guy that Georgia wants. He's going to end up going to Georgia or wherever the other big time power program is. It just I think it kind of depletes that middle class of college football, of those good G5 schools, and probably those second tier Power 4 schools. It just that's kind of what the portal, I think, has done a little bit. So it's interesting to see how teams are obviously going to approach that. We're still young in this portal era, but you've seen the way some teams approach it differently than others. So Georgia got those 4 guys committed now when I was doing the show write-up, and then Noah Thomas, the wide receiver out of Texas A&M, also commits to Georgia. So Noah Thomas, he was A&M's leading receiver this year, 6'6", 200. Like, I think see a guy like that, like that's the kind of guy Georgia was missing in 2025 or in 2024, I should say. Like, you look at what Georgia had at this receiving group. Like, this is the biggest credit I have to give to Kirby Smart. Like, when Kirby Smart says there's a problem, he immediately addresses it. Like, he came in, 2016 and said Georgia doesn't have an elite SEC level offensive line. In 2 years, Georgia had an elite SEC offensive line. Like, he talked about how they needed to get bigger in the trenches, and they immediately, the defensive line recruiting Georgia's done and production just in terms of and development in terms of what these guys have gone on to do, be drafted first round and everything is second to none, honestly. Kirby Smart says you want to get more explosive at the wide receiver group, and look at what this has become now. Like, you've added Zachariah Branch, you've added Noah Thomas in the portal, you brought in Taylon Taylor, a 5-star wide receiver in this 2025 class, as well as CJ Wiley, a big time, like top 50, top 100 4-star receiver out of Milton, Georgia. So when Kirby addresses like there's a problem, we need to do this, 9 times out of 10, the guy gets it done. When he said Georgia needs to be more explosive on offense, he went out and got Todd Monken, and Georgia had, one of the best offenses in college football in 2021 and 2022. And I know the Bobo haters are out there. Bobo is not Todd Monken, but 2023, the offense was damn good as well. So 2024, there's definitely things that need to improve. I can't explain why Georgia couldn't run the ball this year. Like, with how Georgia recruits on the offensive line year in, year out, like, it just didn't make sense. The running back group was obviously banged up, but I tend to think running the football is more about the offensive line than the running back, personally. Like, I mean, a running back, I should say this, an average running back and a great offensive line is going to be a really good run game. An average offensive line and a really good running back, you're going to see something, I don't know, like 2019 Georgia or something, like where DeAndre Swift was the best player on the team, but it was just kind of a whatever group. I mean, and that's a group that had Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson on it also. So, it all kind of depends. So not saying that specific team didn't have a good offensive line, but they just didn't run the ball particularly well. And it's probably just more the offensive identity and everything. But, that's a whole nother story for another day. But in general, I think an average running back behind a great offensive line, you can have a lot of success. And then the kind of running backs Georgia's got, I think behind a good offensive line should be really good. It should be one of the best in the SEC year in, year out. So those are the portal additions. And so I'm really excited to see what some of those guys do to fill some of the holes on Georgia's roster. But then you also have the departures. So we're up to 10 total. I know we touched on like the original group that got in the portal like before the playoff. But since Georgia season has ended, we've seen 3 more guys enter the transfer portal. So far it's Anthony Evans, who, wasn't really a big part. This is the kind of guy that didn't really surprise me going to the portal because he seemed to have some ability. He had some of that quick twitch, make you miss ability. Like, he had his moments as the punt returner, but he seemed like more of a gadget guy. And when they would use him on offense to be more to do like reverses and things like that, I think there's talk about like he wasn't a good blocker. Maybe that's why he didn't play as much. Like, I don't know, but with how Georgia limited where they were at the receiver position this year, I kind of thought he was a guy who could have made a bigger impact in just terms of like, see what he can do. But so he's a guy that's I don't know where, I haven't seen him really projected to land anywhere just yet, but he's one that's in the portal. Jaden Rashada, I thought was an interesting one because he's the former 5-star quarterback that had the whole lawsuit situation with Florida and Miami, ends up at Arizona State, started a couple games in 2023 before he transferred to Georgia. So this guy knew 2024 he wasn't going to play, right? So this guy obviously wasn't coming in to start in 2024. So 2025, I think the logical assumption was that it's Jaden Rashada versus Gunnar Stockton to battle it out for the starting quarterback role in 2025. But according to most, I think Rusty Mansell was the one I heard say this from Dogs HQ, was that when Gunnar Stockton got hurt in the SEC championship game against Texas and Carson Beck was able to come in and hand the ball off for that final play, that Ryan Puglisi was the one who was actually warming up. So Puglisi, the true freshman, zero starting experience, appeared to be the number 3 on Georgia's depth chart this year. So to see Jaden Rashada probably had, maybe just being in practice, you just can just see a guy is better than you, maybe, and you know the writing's on the wall, and maybe that's what did it. And so he thinks it's more of a Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Puglisi battle going into next year. So if that's the case, I guess it makes sense. But I still was a little surprised because this was a guy who knew it wasn't going to start in 2024, and so it was his whole like Georgia career was going to be 2025 and beyond. So it's interesting to see him transfer. And then the most disappointing one, I think, is on the defensive side of the ball with Damon Wilson entering his name into the portal. I felt like, on top of just what Georgia's losing in the outside linebacker room, you got Jalen Walker, you got Chaz Chambliss, you got even Sam Mpimba, the former 5-star who hadn't played at all. Like, he's already in the portal. So to lose Damon Wilson, which they haven't lost officially, I think there was some talks about he wasn't officially in the portal for a little bit, and he's going to come back to Georgia. And then I think he officially put his name in the portal earlier today. That doesn't mean that Georgia can't get him back. I'm sure Georgia wants him back. I think it can be a negotiating tactic to just put your name in the portal, let anybody, the highest bidder, win your services, and maybe that's the school you already play at that becomes the highest bidder. So interesting to see there. I've already seen a crystal ball prediction for Damon Wilson to Ohio State. And I think if he wasn't committed to Ohio, I want to say he was committed to Ohio State, but I could be wrong about that. Coming out of high school, he was a 5-star edge rusher coming out of Venice, Florida. But if he wasn't committed to Ohio State, I think he was like projected to Ohio State. So I think they were the kind of one of the favorites coming out of high school. I want to say he was committed, but I'll have to look that up. So to see Ohio State get a crystal ball prediction that quickly, that concerns you as a Georgia fan, because I think Damon Wilson was really coming along as the season went on this past year, and was one of Georgia's better pass rushers. So, and Georgia didn't have a great pass rush this year by any means. So to lose him, as well as the other guys you're losing in the portal and to the draft, I think that's definitely disappointing. So hopefully Damon Wilson, maybe there's still some hope that Georgia gets him back, but I think he is officially in the portal as of now. And so let's move on to the Dogs in the NFL. The guys moving to the NFL, or the ones coming back. So we're kind of spreading. There's some good news, bad news, good news, bad news. So let's start with the good news on our little roller coaster here. The guys that are coming back in 2025, it's graphic official. I'm not. If there's one thing I know in this world, it's that internet graphics don't lie. So all these guys have released like a graphic, like I'm coming back to Georgia, or they've set it it's been reported and everything like that. So to this point, the 3 I've heard of, the 3 biggest that we know are coming back next year: Christian Miller on the defensive line. I think he was Georgia's most disruptive defensive lineman at times this year. I think he obviously flirted with the portal a year ago, and Georgia was able to get him back. But to see him come back in 2025, I think that's big. Georgia really needed, we knew what some of these guys they were going to lose to the draft, so they really needed to keep as much continuity as possible. So getting Christian Miller back is big. Getting Dylan Bell back, Dylan Bell is a guy who I kind of anticipated, taking that number 1 receiver role in 2024, and just to be frank, like I feel like Dylan Bell had a disappointing year. Like Arian Smith got a lot of the hate for the drops, but it was far from a one-man show as far as those drops went. Like Dylan Bell didn't have as many egregious ones, but I'd say that one in the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame was definitely his worst drop of the season. But it is what it is. I still believe in Dylan Bell, especially with how elusive, or I shouldn't say elusive, versatile of a offensive weapon he is. I think hopefully Georgia is able to come in. Maybe Noah Thomas and Zion Branch become two of their go-to guys at wide receiver, and Dylan Bell is able to kind of be that third or fourth guy, and maybe get some of those reverses like they like to do with him. Hand him the ball a little bit because he's a really physical runner and he's a dynamic athlete. So I'm glad Dylan Bell is coming back next year. I think he's got a lot to improve on. And then I think the biggest news on the offensive side of the ball is Trevor Etienne announcing he's coming back for one more year. So he was kind of a rent-a player, but he's going to be a Georgia a dog over a Gator because he ended as a dog. Now he's got 2 years as a dog. Etienne will officially be a dog, and Florida fans, that'll be a distant memory that he played for Florida. But I felt like at times, I think Carson Beck, was Georgia's best offensive player this season. But in terms of playmakers, Trevor Etienne was Georgia's best playmaker the entire season. And unfortunately, that included the time where he was hurt because you saw what Georgia's run game, like how limited it was without Trevor Etienne. Like, Frazier gutted it out, and Nate Frazier, I think the duo of Nate Frazier and Trevor Etienne should be, the best duo of running backs in the SEC next year. Like, I think I'm a firm believer that Georgia's got a really good running back room, especially when you consider how injured they were this year. Like, you get Roderick Robinson and hopefully Branson Robinson back next year, and you can go 4 deep with like pretty solid running backs. But I think Etienne and Nate Frazier are both. Nate Frazier, I'm really excited to see as a sophomore. Like, that guy popped a lot as a true freshman, and to get him and Etienne, who's definitely the more of a workhorse back, get some of those tough yardage, and using Frazier as the change of pace kind of guy. Like, I really like that. The prospects of that going into 2025. I think Georgia's run game, should be improved. But this leads us to the other one, the other side of dogs to the NFL. Like, they're losing a lot on this offensive line. So Dylan Fairchild had eligibility left guard. He's going pro. Jared Wilson, I believe, had eligibility left. He's the center. He's going pro. Tate Ratledge, the right guard, is going pro. Xavier Truss is graduating, I believe. He's been at Georgia for a while. I think he's out of eligibility. So, you're losing 4 starters on the offensive line, but you're losing 4 starters from an offensive line that wasn't very good. So, is it addition by subtraction? Do you get some of these young guys to come in? Ernest Green played pretty well as a true freshman. Monroe Freeling had his moments. He got whooped against Notre Dame, but this guy was a former 5-star and he's got abilities. So, those are probably Georgia's tackles going into next year. You got Micah Morris. I was blanking on there for a sec. Micah Morris played a decent amount at guard in Tate Ratledge's absence. Like, I think he's looked good at times. I don't know. I think Bobo was the backup center. I don't know if Bobo is a starter next year. And then you got maybe like a Jaw Jackson or something, right? Or Bo Hughley. Like, maybe one of these guys steps up. One of these guys that was a freshman or sophomore from this past year. So, how Georgia's recruited the offensive line in recent years. And, I know a lot of people are calling for Stacey Searle's head and all that, but, I tend to think, this was just a down year for whatever reason. Maybe it's a trend, and Georgia's offensive line is not good enough moving forward, and some changes need to be made. But, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. If it's another year like 2024, as far as running the ball goes, I think changes definitely have to be made. Like, I'm not looking at it in front of me, but I saw a tweet a couple days ago. I want to say it was from Graham Coffey, that was showing Georgia's SEC ranks in the run game since Kirby Smart's been there, and it's like first, second, third, first, like multiple firsts, and then like a fifth or sixth, and then this year is 15th. Like, it's just the clear outlier, and maybe it's an outlier and they bounce back and have a great run game next year, or maybe it's the start of a disturbing trend and Georgia's got to get back to being elite in the trenches and running the football. So that remains to be seen. But the other guys that have officially announced that they are going pro, Jalen Walker, Michael Williams, Malachi Starks. I don't think those three surprise anybody. Malachi Starks was hitting folks with the stroking the chin thinking emoji. One of my favorites, by the way. But, so he got people's hopes up. I think that he was thinking about coming back for his senior year, but, those three guys are projected first rounders. Jalen Walker, the Butt Kiss Award winner this year. Those were no brainers to me. Like I said, Ratledge, Fairchild, Jared Wilson, Arian Smith also had eligibility left, I believe. He's accepted an invitation to the Senior Bowl already. Smile Munden is going pro. Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson on that defensive line. Like, Warren Brinson was probably the most consistent of Georgia's interior defensive linemen this year. I don't think I haven't heard an official word on Terrian Ingram Dawkins. Has he announced? Let me look. Do a quick Google search on our boy Taron Ingram Dawkins. I know this is what the people want to hear on a radio. Okay, so no, I've yet to see Ingram Dawkins make it official. I think he's also one of the more disruptive interior defensive linemen that Georgia had this past year. So, returning Christian Miller, hopefully Ingram Dawkins, added with some of these freshmen and sophomores that were big time recruits, like maybe an Elijah Griffin is a guy who makes an impact year one. Maybe Isaiah Gibson is a edge rusher that makes an impact year one. Like, I always hesitate to put too much on true freshmen. Like, you should never rely on the true freshmen. But man, if they're one of those guys that break out, it's really what sets a team off. Like, you look at like a Georgia, obviously Jake Fromm being a true freshman, or like Andrew Thomas, guys that were just immediate impact guys as true freshmen, and how that impacted Georgia. A Brock Bowers or someone like that. So it really, Nate Frazier kind of should have been one of those guys with how good he was. Georgia's offense just wasn't very good. He should have been the cherry on top, right? Like, if you had a pretty good pass game, a good running game, and that true freshman should have set you off. It wasn't a guy you were really relying on coming into the season. But yeah, so curious to see what happens there. And then obviously the one I've left out is Carson Beck as well. He had eligibility left. He could have potentially come back to school, but he is going pro. And I'm glad Carson Beck is going pro and not going to some other, like, taking like an NIL deal. Like, there was those rumors that, like, oh, maybe Miami, maybe he stays in college for another year and Miami convinces him to come down or something. Like, I'm just glad that Carson Beck, like, this is a guy who doesn't get enough credit in terms of, like, this is the NIL portal era we live in. And this guy, worked hard, waited his turn, didn't just leave at the first sign of not starting, didn't leave at the second sign of not starting, and then worked his way up and was able to give Georgia 2 good years. So I wanted to do an exercise here, because I don't think Carson Beck gets enough love when it comes to his time and where he stands on the Georgia quarterback hierarchy. So that would have been a better title, UGA quarterback hierarchy. I wrote rankings, and I wrote right there, if you're looking on YouTube, in the on the title there, these are 21st century rankings. So there's no Eric Zier, no Fran Tarkenton, no Buck Bellew on this list. This is just my ranking. So Georgia quarterbacks of the 21st century. This is how I see how these quarterbacks stack up. So first of all, to start this list, I have to make a caveat here, a proclamation. There's two different lists. I have my top 5 list in terms of production, in terms of just greatness, college greatness list. And then I also have the blacktop list. And the blacktop, for those of you who don't know, I guess we should call it backyard football. Because the blacktop, for those that play NBA 2K, you can just sign up. You can play with the Celtics and the Mavericks and just play against somebody, play against one of your friends. Or you can go to the blacktop where you can just pick teams and you just be like, oh, I want LeBron and I want KD and I want Steph Curry and we're gonna go nuts, right? And then so you got your blacktop. So the distinction here is that there's guys that have the production, that have, just the career achievements, and there's the guys who, if I just have to play one game, I just need one drive, one play, like give me the guy with the ability, right? So I think that's, if you're following along, that's the distinction I make. So let me start with my greatness list. So this is in terms of like what these guys achieved in college. If you're playing a video game with one of these guys in college, just the amount of achievements you got, the higher score or something you got, because of just, it is about career accomplishment and actually producing on the field. So let's put this list up on the screen. This is the greatness list right here. So number 1, you got Stetson Bennett. I hesitated to put Stetson on here for the longest time, but damn, I've rewatched some of these 2021, 2022 games, and this guy just made all the plays when they needed to happen. Like 46 touchdowns to 14 picks in his last 2 years, 2 national titles, 1 SEC title, finished 4th in the Heisman Trophy, 30-3 as a starter, and that goes back to 2020 when he didn't play so well. So 2020, Stetson Bennett, not a good quarterback, a well below average quarterback. 2021, 2022, this guy was just, he was on another level. In 2022 especially, I think he was like that kind of game manager that made plays with his legs. So, and also there's the 2021 aspect of like Georgia was sitting on a lot of fourth quarter leads too, and not necessarily having Stetson put up those big numbers. But 2022, the offense was just a lot more crisp. This guy was more crisp, and it was just 15-0 season. Like I said, Heisman finalist. Stetson, no argument for Stetson. I think for most, I guess I shouldn't say no argument. Georgia fans have so many opinions about the quarterback position. Number 2, I got Aaron Murray. So Aaron Murray has been the long time number 1 on this list. 121 touchdowns, 41 picks in his time. He was all-time SEC touchdown leader when he was all said and done. His problem was the 36-18 as a starter. Like that's not on Aaron Murray. He was a redshirt freshman. He was the best player on the team in 2010. But it was 2010? Back in 2010. But he was the best player on a bad team, on a 6-7 team. But I mean, not a lot of help, I would say. I mean, you had Gurley in 2012 and 2013, but and solid receivers. But Aaron Murray, I think, was a stud. And a lot of revisionist history with Georgia fans. This guy got a lot of hate for 3 years, unjustly so. And but I think for most, I would say if you say Aaron Murray is your number 1 Georgia quarterback of all time, I wouldn't argue with you, but I think you got to put Stetson on there. Number 3, this is where it might get controversial. I got to go with Jake Fromm. I think Jake Fromm is very underappreciated when it comes to Georgia quarterbacks. And I saw this question posed about Jake Fromm and Carson Beck recently, and I really had to start thinking about it. So Jake Fromm, 78 touchdowns, 18 picks in his 3 years as a starter at Georgia, 1 SEC title, 36-7 as a starter. Man, how close from a national championship as a true freshman. Would have been the first ever to do that. But turned out Trevor Lawrence was the first ever to do that. But I kind of feel like Jake Fromm is like the Mark Richt to Stetson's Kirby. Like Jake Fromm was like so good that he like, I don't know. He made Georgia fans think like, oh, we can be better. Like, so I don't, it's hard to say. Like Jake Fromm was really good. Like gritty as a freshman, everything. Like, I feel like he was just kind of a winner. You know, they talk about all the intangible stuff and everything. Sophomore, like as a sophomore, I don't hear enough people say it. As a sophomore, Jake Fromm was one of the best quarterbacks in college football, like hands down. Like that's why Justin Fields didn't win the job in 2018. We don't need to rehash that in terms of toxic UGA quarterback conversations. But as a sophomore, Jake Fromm was elite. Like the biggest game of the season was the Alabama game against, at the time, was talked about as like the greatest Alabama team, greatest SEC team of all time. If you remember that 2018 Alabama team going into the SEC championship. Things changed a little bit after they lost to Clemson in the Natty, but that was the talk around them. And he just absolutely outdueled Tua. Tua gets knocked out of the game. Jake Fromm played an amazing game. Georgia loses, what was it, 35-28? Like they were up 28-7, I think, early third quarter. But they obviously don't end up winning that game. But I think Jake Fromm kind of one of the biggest like what if scenarios to me, because in 2019, I should just continue. 2019, he was not good. And I should say he was disappointing because you look at his numbers, he still threw like 24 touchdowns, I think 5 picks. Like he was just really efficient, good, not great. But that offense with James Coley in 2019 and losing, like it was their top 5 receivers, I want to say, from that 2018 team. It was, Isaac Nauta went pro early, Mecole Hardman went pro, Riley Ridley went pro, and then Terry Godwin graduated, and then JJ Holloman got kicked off the team that offseason. So you lost the top 5 receivers from that year. I feel like it's maybe making excuses for him, but 2019 wasn't a good year. And so I never understood Fromm going pro after 2019. And I think 2020 is like the real what if year to me from a Georgia history perspective, because think about like that 21 defense is talked about like the greatest defense of all time. And 2022 is damn good too. A lot of those guys on the 2021 defense were on the 2020 defense. Like, and you also had Azeez Ojulari. You also had Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes on that team. Richard LeCount even. So 2020 was still a really loaded roster. And I mean, that was a team that went, how many games they ended up playing? Was it 9-2? I mean, they were beating Alabama, the national championship Alabama team in the third quarter, lost by 2 touchdowns to Florida. Like, if you have Jake Fromm on those 2020 Georgia teams instead of, let's be honest, a bad Stetson or Dwan Mathis starting, and obviously JT Daniels down the stretch, but JT Daniels kind of came in once for like none of the difficult, he didn't play any of the difficult games. So he played well in his last 4 games this season, but the main chunk of the season, the big games, were with Stetson Bennett and Dwan Mathis, and that's about as bad as you could be in 2020. So you get an experienced senior quarterback like Jake Fromm. I really do wonder what Georgia does in 2020, and then Stetson takes, I don't know, maybe it changes history and Stetson doesn't take over in 2021, and you go to JT Daniels, but I don't know. I guess if JT Daniels is starting, he started 2021 anyway, so maybe it always ends up being Stetson. But yeah, so that's a real what if scenario. So went long on Jake Fromm. I have it number 3. Then I went Carson Beck at number 4, and that might be a hot take. I feel like a lot of Georgia fans just don't give Carson Beck the credit he deserved. 58 touchdowns, 20 picks in his time at Georgia, 24-3 as a starter. You got to give him that SEC title. Obviously, Gunnar Stockton came in for the second half, but he's got an SEC title on his belt. They don't get to the SEC championship without Carson Beck, so you got to give him credit for that. I think he had the opportunity to be top 2, top 3 had Georgia gone on a run and, in this college football playoff. And I think with the bracket they got, I think there's no reason to think Georgia couldn't have beaten Notre Dame and Penn State with Carson Beck as that quarterback. But Ohio State, that might be another story. But, Carson Beck had a very productive career at Georgia. And I think, I think he deserves to be considered, one of the best that played at Georgia in recent history. And then number 5, I go David Green. That's obviously for some of the older heads out there, the early Mark Richt years. So he had the accomplishments, but I think people kind of remember David Green being better than he actually was. Like 72 touchdowns and 32 picks in his 4 years as a starter. Won SEC title, went 42-10 as a starter, which was the record. Most wins as a starter at that point in 2004. I think Kellen Moore, did Kellen Moore break it, or maybe Colt McCoy or something? I'm sure Bo Nix, he started like 60 games or something. So I'm sure Bo Nix broke it. But yeah, so David Green was a good player, but I feel like it's kind of the intangible stuff. Like it had been 20 years since Georgia won the SEC. And so David Green is like that started the Richt era that really elevated the program. And so I think David Green kind of gets more of a piggyback on that team success, even if he wasn't like the reason for all of it. Don't get me wrong. I think he's SEC Offensive Player of the Year as a sophomore. He was very good, but his really disappointing junior year in 2003 for David Green. But yeah, then 2004, the year where he had like a Stafford final year at Georgia. The preseason number 1, went 10-2, but it just felt really empty. Right. So I think that's why I give David Green that 5th spot. Basically all the Georgia quarterbacks that won SEC titles. I think that outside of Aaron Murray, getting in there at number 2 is basically my list. And then you got the other list. Let's go with the backyard football list. Here's my other list here. On this list, you got Matthew Stafford, number 1. I think it goes without saying. Number 1 overall pick, 16 years in the NFL. But his time at Georgia just wasn't great. Through double-digit interceptions all 3 years at Georgia. 2007, I think that team was good enough to win a national title. We'd be talking about Stafford way different if Georgia somehow gets in that SEC championship game against LSU and they're able to somehow get to the national champ. If they're able to get that game, I fully believe Georgia wins and goes to the national championship, beats Ohio State, wins the national title in 2007. Who knows how that changes history for Mark Richt and everything. But Stafford's my guy. And I don't think everyone loved Stafford because he wasn't necessarily an all-time great at Georgia, but the talent was always there. The ability was always there. And I feel like the intangibles were always there, even if he's not given credit for it. You've seen his time in Detroit, Super Bowl champion with the Rams. Stafford's a dude. I'm pretty vocal. You can see my teams here in the background, Braves and Georgia. I'm not a Falcons guy. Once Vic left, I don't need to go into it. Once Vic left, I kind of jumped off the bandwagon, never jumped back on. I was basically a low-key Lions fan the whole time Stafford was there. Now Stafford's with the Rams. Stetson's with the Rams. I'm hoping the Rams can get it done, win another Super Bowl. But I got Stafford at 1. DJ Shockley, I have at number 2. If I'm just going on the blacktop, DJ was a legit dual threat. And 24 touchdowns, 5 picks, led a team to SEC title his 1 year as a starter. I don't know how many people know this, but it's kind of a trivial fact in Georgia history. In 2000, Jim Donnan was still the head coach, and David Green was redshirting. Quincy Carter got hurt, and Jim Donnan had the option of burning David Green's red shirt and starting the last 4 or 5 games of the season. Instead, he gave this, I think he was like a 4th-year junior, 5th-year senior. I'm going to say Corey Phillips. I think it was a junior. Corey Phillips was the guy who ended up just starting the rest of that season for Georgia, preserved David Green's red shirt. And, kind of that whole time, it was kind of considered what a great move that was. Obviously, Donnan didn't get to reap the benefits. He was fired after that 2000 season. But it was kind of remembered initially as oh, that's so great, because then we got David Green as a starter for 4 years. I kind of think that turned out to be a curse in Georgia history, that had David Green's red shirt been burned in 2000, then he's a senior in 2003. And in 2004, 2005, you get 2 years of DJ Shockley starting. And I think Georgia wins a national championship with 2 years of DJ Shockley. I think he was just so much more, exciting to watch, just so much more dynamic than David Green ever was. That's my personal opinion. DJ Shockley was legit, only had his 1 year. You could argue him in being like the top 5 and like the greatness thing, but I think only a 1 year starter, it's tough. It's tough to say. Did win a conference in his 1 year as the starter. Blew out LSU in that 2005 SEC championship game. But yeah, I got DJ Shockley number 2. Number 3, I got to go with Stetson. This guy played like he was in the backyard sometimes. Just a gamer, dual threat. Go Stetson at 3. Number 4, this is where I would go Beck. 4 on the greatness, 4 on the blacktop, or I should say backyard scale. 2023 was one of the more prolific seasons I've ever seen from a Georgia quarterback in terms of passing. Just like, this dude's got a huge arm. Like, the offense, the way Carson Beck just made pinpoint 20, 30-yard throws, like downfield, like put balls right where they needed to be. Obviously, McConkey and Bowers helped a lot, but I think more than Bowers and McConkey helping, I think this 2024 supporting cast just really let him down. I think if Georgia had an average receiving core this year in the SEC, I think Beck and this Georgia offense is much more dynamic. But just to be honest, it was a below average receiving group. And, I think that was ultimately what cost Carson Beck. But, I'm laying it out in the backyard. Like Carson Beck, the throws that guy can make, I'm putting him number 4. And then number 5, number 2 on our greatness list, I'm going Aaron Murray. Like he was, he had some athleticism to him. He could move around a little bit, and he was a gamer for sure. And I think when all those injuries happened in 2013, I think that's when Murray really started to get the respect he deserved, and he was just kind of putting the team on his back. That Tennessee game comes to mind, where he had that like 50-yard run, and they beat Tennessee. I want to say that game went to overtime. I think that was the game Pig Howard fumbled in overtime for Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. And then that prayer at Jordan-Hare game where Murray led Georgia back in a Jordan-Hare Stadium against Auburn, the eventual national runner-up Auburn, and they needed that prayer. Like I said, one of the flukier plays of all time in order to beat an 8-5 Georgia team. But it is what it is. But yeah, that's my list as far as backyard football. If I just have to have one game to win it, I think those are my top 5 Georgia quarterbacks that I'm taking. All right, let's see. We got a question in the chat here. Jabari Anderson, do you think next year's defense will be our best defense under Kirby Smart? Because I do. Jabari, that is a hot take right there, sir. I can't agree with you there, because I'm afraid the 2021 defense is the best we will ever see. And I think the 2022 defense isn't far behind. Like, as far as I'm concerned, the defensive line is the number one, like, just X factor as far as a defense goes. And that defensive line personnel will just never be matched. Like, we had a guy that wasn't the first, second, or third team All-SEC that was drafted first overall in the NFL draft. Not first round, number 1 overall. Like, Trayvon Walker just gets totally forgotten about. You had Jordan Davis winning the Bednarik Award. You had Jalen Carter as the number 3 defensive tackle. As far as I'm concerned, I've said this, I think, numerous times on the podcast. Jalen Carter is the best defensive lineman to play at Georgia, and Jalen Carter is the best defensive lineman that will ever play at Georgia. Like, I really do think this guy is an NFL Hall of Famer. I think he is. I don't know if he's Aaron Donald, like maybe the greatest to ever play, but Jalen Carter is damn near unblockable at times. So you just had a defensive line. What did I say? Jordan Davis, Trayvon Walker, Jalen Carter, Devontae Wyatt was a first rounder. Like, and then you had the Nolan Smith, the edge rusher. That's another one of those things about the 2020 team. Because of all those first rounders that I talked about, Jermaine Johnson is another one that was on that 2020 team that transferred to Florida State and became a first round pick. So I think the 2020, 2021, and 2022 defense were just, I think those were elite groups. I'm a little concerned about Georgia's defense for next year, honestly. Like, I was talking about that edge rush, that outside edge rusher room. Like, Damon Wilson going in the portal, Jalen Walker, obviously he played a little inside, a little outside, but his biggest impact was as an edge rusher. So you lose both of those guys. You lose Chaz Chambliss. And I talked about Sam Mpimba, who hasn't played at all, but he was a big-time recruit. Excuse me, like Gabe Harris. I think that's the edge rusher with the most experience, like the defensive line. You're bringing back Christian Miller. Hopefully you're bringing back, hopefully you're bringing back Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. Like that secondary, you're losing Dan Jackson and Malachi Starks. Like those are some impact players. I didn't even name Michael Williams. You're losing from this past year's defense. Like Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse were two of your more consistent defensive linemen. I'm a little worried that Georgia, because of this portal era we live in, like Georgia doesn't just have dudes at first string, second string, third string, just waiting in the wings for their time to start. So, this linebacker group should still be good with CJ Allen, with Raylan Wilson, and Chris Cole really came on this year. I'm really excited to see Ellis Robinson. One thing I'm concerned about Ellis Robinson being the number one player in the country, just didn't play like one meaningful snap as far as I could tell this year. I know there were some games he got in, but Ellis Robinson really didn't play at all. And in terms of guys, and that's why I don't rely, on guys, even if they're a 5-star, to be impact players as true freshmen. But you do expect, I don't know, like a DeAndre Swift kind of freshman role, where a guy contributes. Maybe he's not a starter, but he kind of comes in and shows what he can do. Especially when you think about some of these Georgia defenses, like a Trayvon Walker as a freshman and a Kobe Dean as a freshman, like guys that would get on the field. I didn't even name Kobe Dean when I was naming those 2021 defense. Like he was like the heart and soul of that defense. But guys that had those packages as true freshmen, like a Chris Cole did this year. Georgia doesn't sub a lot in the secondary, so that could be a big reason for it. But also, when it comes to Georgia's corners, they weren't great this year. Daniel Harris and Julian Humphrey, who started most of the season, and before Daniel Harris, I think, kind of beat him out. So to see Ellis Robinson not really get one, legitimate kind of action on the season, that's one thing that kind of concerns me. But I think if we see Georgia have the best defense under Kirby Smart next year, it's going to be a lot of guys that are right now today on January 7th are very unproven and they break out. So Georgia's not a team that you would rule that out by any means, because how this program recruits. But I would definitely be surprised if this was the best defense of the Kirby Smart era. So let's see here. Been going almost an hour here. Let me end it with this, with a brief college football playoff semifinal preview. I know most people are a little checked out after Georgia losing, but you're still gonna watch these games. I wish they were both on Saturday, but it's people making decisions that don't care about college football have these games being played on Thursday and Friday. Oh man, which one is which? Actually, 1-9. What is 1-9? 1-9 is Thursday. Okay, so 1-9 Thursday is the Orange Bowl, Notre Dame and Penn State. Notre Dame comes in as a 1.5-point favorite. It's funny the way people are talking about Penn State, like, oh, they finally broke through, like they finally did it, got to the Final Four, like they've accomplished more this year. But have they? Like, what has Penn State accomplished this year? The knock on Penn State was that they lose to the elite teams. They lost to Ohio State, they lost to Oregon, they beat SMU and Boise State, so now they're elite. Like I'm confused. So Penn State, the jury is still out on Penn State. They haven't really proven anything they haven't proven in previous years. So I'm really curious, to see what they do. But at the same time, is Notre Dame an elite team? Like Notre Dame looked really good against Georgia, but that was still a winnable game that Georgia had with their backup quarterback. Not going to act like Notre Dame didn't like deserve the win or anything. 23-10, they took care of business. But, Georgia was playing with a backup quarterback. So I still don't know what Notre Dame's made of. Not saying they're not a good team. I don't know how elite they are. So Penn State struggles against the elite teams. Is Notre Dame that? I don't know. Like I'm not a Drew Aller guy personally. Like he seems fine. Like Penn State takes care of business, and like I said, when they play the inferior teams. But against Ohio State, they didn't score an offensive touchdown. So Ohio State looks like the best team in college football. So maybe that's not an indictment. Maybe that's just is what it is. But that's what Penn State's kind of being judged against, is against the elite teams. And I don't necessarily know that Notre Dame is that. Riley Leonard is like a gritty guy and everything. But I think if Notre Dame's going to win this game, he's got to do more through the air. Like 90 passing yards he had against Georgia. That's the take I'll say. If Penn State's defense plays as well as Georgia's defense did against Notre Dame, Penn State wins that game. I think Georgia, just how bad they were offensively. I think Penn State's been able to run the ball a lot better than Georgia consistently this season. And it feels like a classic Big Ten game. So it feels like, a kind of game that Penn State can win, like a really even matchup. So I'm going to take Penn State 21-20. James Franklin takes his team to the national championship. And then on Friday night, Ohio State and Texas. Ohio State is a 5.5-point favorite. I've said this basically all year. Georgia is one of the most difficult teams to figure out all season. Like 14 games. Now it's all said and done. I still can't figure them out. I don't even know if they played a game again tomorrow. I don't know what team is showing up. The defense has looked elite at times. The defense has looked pretty average at times. And obviously playing with QB2 makes it a little more difficult. But this team, the flawed Georgia team, beat Texas twice. And defense really honestly shut them down twice. Like, I think Ohio State looks like the best team in college football. If with what they did to Oregon last week and what they did to Tennessee in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised if they blew out Texas. Like that was one of the calls I tooted my own horn on here after the fact was I thought that there was a good chance Ohio State would jump up on Tennessee 21-0. And that's exactly what they did. They jumped up 34-0 on Oregon, a much better team, I think, than Tennessee this year. So you talk about that and add that into what Arizona State did versus Texas last week. Like I would argue Arizona State was the better team in that game. And there were some controversial calls on top of it. So outside of like the opening drive and then the punt return for a touchdown, like Texas's offense was kind of held in check for the next 2 or 3 quarters. So I don't see any scenario where Texas beats Ohio State. Like I don't see it. I think there's a chance Ohio State wins big. I'm not going to necessarily say they win big, but I'm definitely going to pick them to cover this spread. I'm going to take Ohio State 38, Texas 24. So those are my college football playoff predictions. Unfortunately, the Bulldogs will not be playing in the semifinal for the second straight year, but those games should be a lot of fun to watch. Once again, I appreciate everyone who's tuned in live, who's joining, who's chime in on the comments. We appreciate you. Like I said, follow me on Twitter, Matt_W_green. And please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate that. Until next time. And like I said, I come to you people every Tuesday night, 8:00. We'll do that all off season. Maybe even add some extra shows throughout the week. We'll see how we're feeling. If we're feeling frisky, we'll do that. But one you can count on is every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. I appreciate everyone who tuned in. And go Dogs.